The storm was tearing through Chicago when the black SUV stopped outside the closed pawn shop on South Side. The Mafia boss, Dominic Salvatore, stepped out to make a call, but instead he heard the sound of someone crying in the dark alley nearby. He walked toward the sound. A young woman sat crumpled against the wet brick wall, clutching a silver necklace in her trembling hands, her sobs barely louder than the rain. She looked up when his shadow fell over her, and Dominic saw a face that would haunt him forever. Bruises covered her cheekbones. Her lip was split and crusted with dried blood. Her clothes were torn and soaked, clinging to a body far too thin, but it was her eyes that stopped him, brown eyes filled with so much pain, so much exhaustion, that they looked like they belonged to someone who had already died. "Please," she whispered, holding up the necklace with shaking hands. "Please, I need to sell this. My sister is dying. She is in the car. She cannot breathe. I need money for medicine. Please." Dominic frowned. "What are you doing out here alone in this condition? Who did this to you?" The woman flinched as if expecting him to hit her. She tried to stand but collapsed, grabbing her ribs in pain. Dominic knelt down, keeping his voice steady. "I am not going to hurt you. Tell me what happened." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much horror. "The men," she whispered. "The men who said I owed money. But I never borrowed anything. My ex-boyfriend signed papers in my name and disappeared. They said the debt belongs to me now. $100,000. Dominic felt his jaw tighten. Loan sharks. He had heard stories like this before. "How much did you actually owe?" "I never owed anything," she cried. "It was all fake. But they did not care. They took everything. My furniture, my clothes, my sister's wheelchair, her portable oxygen concentrator. She has Down syndrome and severe brittle asthma. She is having an attack and will not survive the night without oxygen. She is dying right now in that car." The woman pointed to a rusted sedan nearby, and Dominic could see a figure slumped in the passenger seat, barely moving. But when the woman pulled down the collar of her torn shirt, when he saw the bruises covering her neck and shoulders, the cigarette burns on her collarbone, his blood turned to ice. "They beat me," she whispered. "They said if I did not pay, they would take my sister and sell her. They gave me 3 days. 3 days to find $100,000 or they would come back for her." Dominic's hands clenched into fists. "Who are these men? Tell me exactly who did this to you." The woman hesitated, fear flashing across her battered face. "The leader. He had a snake tattoo on his neck. He said his name was Vincent. Vincent Romano. He said no one could touch him because he worked for Salvatore. He said the Mafia boss himself gave him permission to do whatever he wanted." Dominic froze, not from guilt, but from a rage so cold it burned. Vincent Romano, his own lieutenant, a man he had trusted with territory and collections, a man who had apparently been running his own empire of cruelty, using Dominic's name to terrorize innocent women. He stood slowly, rain pouring down his coat, his gray eyes turning to steel. "What is your name?" "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Carter. And your sister?" "Lily. She is 18. She does not understand why people want to hurt us. She keeps asking me why the bad men took her chair. She just wants to walk again someday. That was her dream." Dominic pulled out his phone and made a call. "Tony, I need Dr. Chen at my location in 10 minutes with emergency respiratory equipment. I also need a full security detail. Send everyone." He hung up and looked back at Elena, who was staring at him with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. Dominic knelt down again, his voice low but certain. "I am the man whose name was used to destroy your life, and I am going to make this right." He helped her stand, supporting her broken body against his, because whoever had touched this woman, whoever had terrorized her sister, whoever had hidden behind his name to commit these atrocities, was about to learn what it truly meant to fear the king of Chicago's underworld. Stay with me until the end, because what Dominic discovers about Vincent Romano will expose a betrayal more horrifying than he ever imagined, and Elena's nightmare is only just beginning. As the night rain kept pounding against the old rooftops of South Side, if you are listening to this story and can feel the ache, the survival, and the fragile sliver of light that Elena and Lily are clinging to, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to tap like, and to share the video so this story can reach even more hearts. Tell us where you are listening from: Chicago, California, or some quiet corner of the world. Leave a comment below and let us know how far this journey has traveled and what you are feeling in this very moment. Your comments are the strength that keeps us going, the reason we continue telling these emotional stories, shadowed by darkness yet threaded with hope, every single day. Dominic guided Elena through the shadowed alley as the night rain kept crashing down as if determined to drown the entire city, and the frail young woman trembled in his arms without pause, every step pulling a small cry of pain from her cracked lips. When they reached the battered sedan, Dominic glanced through the fogged window and felt his chest tighten, as though an unseen hand had clenched around his heart. A young girl lay motionless in the passenger seat, her head tilted to one side, her lips a frightening shade of blue, her chest rising in weak, uneven breaths like a candle fighting to survive the wind. Elena lunged toward the car, slamming her hands against the glass, her voice breaking into a ragged scream, calling Lily's name again and again as if sheer will could tether the girl to life. She wrenched the door open and gathered her sister's limp body into her arms, shaking her gently, pleading wildly. But Lily did not stir. Her eyes stayed shut, her breath rattling like wind squeezing through a narrow crack, each gasp painfully far from the next. Dominic stood there watching, feeling something in him tear open, for he had seen death countless times, yet nothing had ever felt more vicious than witnessing an innocent girl slowly fade, because monsters had stolen the machine that kept her breathing. 10 minutes later, the wail of an ambulance ripped through the night. Dr. Chen leapt out with 2 nurses, carrying emergency respiratory equipment. He was Dominic's private physician, a man of 60 with hands that had pulled hundreds back from the brink. "Hurry!" Dominic shouted, his voice raw. "She cannot breathe." Dr. Chen moved instantly, fitting an oxygen mask over Lily's nose and mouth, checking her pulse and her pupils, his face darkening. "She is in status asthmaticus and severe hypoxia. She has been without oxygen for too long. I need to intubate her immediately." Elena dropped to her knees beside her sister, gripping Lily's cold hand as tears mingled with the rain. "Please do not leave me," she whispered, her voice fractured. "You are all I have. You promised you would not go anywhere." Dr. Chen worked quickly, skillfully. But then the worst happened. The monitor released a long, unbroken tone. Her heart stopped. A nurse cried. "No!" Elena screamed, trying to throw herself toward Lily, but Dominic held her back as she thrashed in his arms like a wounded animal. 30 seconds passed, 30 of the longest seconds of Dominic's life, as he held a collapsing Elena and watched Dr. Chen compress Lily's chest, push oxygen into her lungs, and fight death itself for the life of an 18-year-old girl who had never harmed anyone. Then a steady beeping returned. "Her heart is beating again," Dr. Chen exhaled. "She is stable for now, but she must be closely monitored." Elena broke into sobs, her knees giving way, and Dominic lifted her gently, saying nothing, allowing her to weep into his shoulder. In that moment, something miraculous happened. Lily's eyelids fluttered open, her clear, innocent eyes wandered weakly before settling on Elena's face. "Lena," she whispered, her voice thinner than a breath. "I'm here, sweetheart," Elena cried, clutching her hand. "You are safe." Lily smiled, a soft, childlike smile. Then her gaze shifted and found Dominic standing behind her sister. She did not fear him. She did not shrink. Instead, she whispered something that struck through him like lightning. "Lena, the angel came to save us. I saw Mama in my dream. She said she would send someone to protect us. He is here now." Something inside Dominic cracked open. 25 years earlier, his own mother had said almost the same words before she died in his arms. "Live well," she had whispered, "and one day an angel will come for you." He had never believed her. He had believed in power and weakness, nothing more. Yet tonight, staring into the clear eyes of a girl who had just climbed back from death's edge, he wondered if he had become someone's angel without realizing it. He turned to Tony, who stood waiting for orders. "Take them to my car," he said. "We are going home. No one touches them tonight." 3 cars rolled through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, their engines humming in the darkness. Elena sat in the back, holding Lily tightly as the girl rested on a mobile medical stretcher, her eyes never leaving her sister's face. Dr. Chen remained beside her, checking Lily's vital signs again and again. Dominic sat in the front, silent, gray eyes fixed on the curtain of rain, though his mind was consumed with thoughts of Vincent Romano and the horrors committed under his name. After roughly 40 minutes, the convoy turned down a road lined with towering oak trees. A massive iron gate opened slowly, and Elena looked through the window with widening eyes. A grand Victorian estate rose before her, with white stone columns, intricate balconies, and dozens of glowing windows staring down like watchful giants. The ground stretched wide and immaculate, hedges trimmed to perfection, a marble fountain shimmering beneath soft golden lights. Elena had never seen anything like it, and fear surged through her. This was the home of a Mafia kingpin. This was the stronghold of the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld. She was stepping into the lair of a beast with nothing to shield herself. Perhaps this was another trap. Perhaps Dominic was worse than Vincent. Perhaps he had saved her only to demand something far more devastating in return. The car stopped beneath the grand entrance. Men in black suits opened the doors immediately. Lily was wheeled inside, Dr. Chen and two nurses guiding her toward the interior. Elena tried to follow, but her legs buckled as the pain of her injuries resurfaced. Dominic steadied her, and she jerked back, eyes sharp with fear. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking though she tried to sound strong. "I have nothing to give. No money, no possessions, nothing. If you think I will repay you with my body, you are wrong. I would rather die." Dominic looked at her, and there was no anger in his eyes, no irritation, only a shadow of something like hurt. "I want nothing from you," he said slowly, his voice low and steady. "I do not want your money. I do not want your body. The only thing I need is the truth, all of it, every piece of what Vincent Romano did." Elena stared at him, unsure whether to believe him. 8 years had taught her that nothing in life was free, that every kindness carried a price, but she was too exhausted to question anything more. Lily was taken to a private medical room inside the mansion, a space equipped like a small hospital. Dr. Chen stayed behind, promising updates. A housemaid led Elena to a room on the second floor. She stepped inside and froze. The room was larger than her old apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in crisp white linens, deep red velvet curtains, a mahogany vanity, and a private marble bathroom. Clean clothes were laid out on the bed. A tray of hot food still steaming waited on the table. Elena stared at the plate, her stomach twisting with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten, perhaps 3 days earlier before Vincent arrived, yet she did not dare touch anything. She feared it was all a dream, that she would wake to find herself back in the dark alley clutching her mother's necklace, waiting to die. A soft knock sounded. An older woman entered, her face lined with age yet warm and gentle. She wore a maid's uniform, but her eyes held the kindness of a grandmother. "I am Maria," she said softly. "The master has asked me to take care of you. You need a bath and clean clothes. Your wounds must be treated." Elena stepped back, still wary. "Why is he doing all this?" she asked quietly. "Who am I to deserve this?" Maria studied the bruised young woman before her, her gaze threaded with sorrow. "I have worked for the master for 20 years, she said. "Never once has he brought anyone into this estate. This is his most private sanctuary, a place no outsider enters." She stepped closer and gently touched Elena's shoulder. "Yet tonight he brought you here. You must be someone very special." Elena almost laughed, bitter and hollow. Special? She was a 24-year-old woman who had lost everything. Her parents were gone. Her lover had betrayed her. She had been beaten, robbed, her sister nearly killed. She was not special. She was a woman drowning in despair who, by some impossible twist of fate, had fallen into the arms of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, and she could not tell whether that was salvation or doom. The next morning the sunlight filtered through the curtains and drew Elena out of sleep, and it took her several long seconds to understand where she was. The room was lavish, the bed soft beneath her, the blankets warm against her skin. It was not the dark alley. It was not the broken car. She was still alive. Lily was still alive. A housemaid knocked gently and informed her that the master wished to see her in his study after she had eaten breakfast and completed a health check. Elena went first to the medical room, where Lily slept peacefully with the ventilator humming beside her bed. Dr. Chen explained that her condition had stabilized and that all she needed now was rest and proper care. Elena bent down and kissed her sister's forehead, whispering a thank you she did not know how to direct or where to send. Dominic's study was on the ground floor, a broad room lined with oak-paneled walls, bookshelves stretching to the ceiling, and a walnut desk set before a great window overlooking the garden. Dominic sat there, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly disheveled as though he too had not slept through the night. He motioned toward the chair opposite him. "Sit down. Are you feeling better?" Elena sat with her back straight and her shoulders taut. She still did not fully trust this man, but she owed him the truth, the only currency she had left. "I need you to tell me everything," Dominic said, his voice low and solemn. "From the beginning. Everything that happened to you and your sister. I need to understand the whole picture to deal with Vincent Romano properly." Elena drew a long breath, her hands clasped in her lap. She had not told this story in years. She had buried it deep, forcing herself to forget so she could keep moving forward. But now, sitting before the most powerful man in Chicago, she knew it was time to open the coffin of her past. "When I was 16, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My parents died in a car accident. A drunk driver slammed into them on the highway. My father died at the scene. My mother survived 2 more days in the hospital before she passed." She paused, staring down. "I remember that day. I was at school, studying for exams. The police came to tell me. I did not believe them. I thought they were mistaken. My parents had kissed me goodbye that morning. My mother promised to cook my favorite ribs for dinner. How could they be gone?" Dominic remained silent, but his gray eyes never left her face. "Lily was only 10 then," Elena continued. "She was born with Down syndrome. She needed special care, medication, therapy. My parents had dedicated their lives to her, and when they died, that responsibility fell on me." She lifted her gaze, her eyes reddened, though no tears fell. She had cried too much in her life to muster any more. "We had no relatives, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles. Both my parents were only children, and their parents had died long ago. I was all Lily had in the world, and I was only 16. She let out a brittle laugh. "I had been accepted to a university with a full scholarship. I wanted to become a doctor. But I could not go to school and care for Lily at the same time. I could not put her in foster care. I promised my mother before she died that I would protect Lily with everything I had. So I dropped out. I started working." Elena told him about the 8 years that followed 8 years of quiet hell. She worked 3 jobs at once. She served coffee from 5 in the morning to 10. She worked as a cashier from 11 to 6. She cleaned offices from 8 to midnight. She slept 4 hours a day, ate whatever was cheapest, wore second-hand clothes. 8 years, she whispered. 8 years without a single day off. No friends, no life of my own, no youth. Every dollar I earned went to Lily's medication, to her therapy, to my dream of buying her a motorized wheelchair so she could move on her own." She met Dominic's gaze directly. "I do not regret it. Lily is everything I have. She is the reason I wake up every morning. But sometimes, late at night, when I am too tired to sleep, I wonder what my life would have been if that accident had never happened." Dominic still said nothing, but beneath the desk his hand curled into a fist until his knuckles turned white. He knew that feeling. He knew what it was to lose a mother too young, to face a brutal world alone, and for the first time in years, something in his frozen heart began to crack. Elena paused as though gathering courage for the part that followed, the part that hurt more, not because fate had struck but because someone had chosen to betray her. And betrayal always cut deeper than tragedy. 2 years ago, she said quietly, I met a man named Daniel Brooks. He was a regular at the cafe where I worked. Every morning he came in, ordered an Americano, and sat in the corner reading. He was polite, gentle, always tipping generously. One day he asked my name. Then he asked if I wanted to get coffee after my shift. I said no. I had no time for dating. I had Lily to care for. But he was patient. He kept coming, kept asking how I was, kept waiting. After 6 months, I said yes. Dominic listened without moving, his expression unreadable but his eyes tracking every flicker of emotion in hers. He was wonderful, Elena said, a bitter smile touching her lips. At least I thought so then. He cared about me in a way no one had since my parents died. He asked if I was tired, if I had eaten, if I needed anything. He bought gifts for Lily, spent time playing with her, made her laugh. After 8 years of loneliness, I felt for the first time that I was not alone. She inhaled shakily. After a year he proposed. He said he wanted to marry me, to take care of both me and Lily. He said we would buy a small house with a yard for Lily to play. He said I would not have to work 3 jobs anymore. He said he would handle everything. And I believed him. God, I believed every word. Her voice began to tremble. One day he handed me a stack of papers. He said they were loan documents for the house and that they needed both our signatures. He said the bank required it. I did not read them carefully. I trusted him. I loved him. I signed everything he put in front of me. She lifted her gaze, her eyes raw. 3 months later he vanished. No goodbye, no message. His phone disconnected, his apartment empty, and all my savings, $12,000 I had scraped together over 8 years, were gone with him. Elena let out a strangled laugh. I went to the police. They said they would investigate. But a week later it was not the police who came. It was debt collectors. They said Daniel had borrowed $50,000 from a finance company and that I was the co-signer. They said the debt was now mine. They said if I did not pay, they would sue me, seize my assets, destroy my credit forever. Dominic's jaw tightened. Did you go back to the police? Elena gave another hollow laugh, the sound closer to weeping. Yes. I brought every document I had. I said I had been tricked. I said I did not know what I had signed. And do you know what they told me? They said it was a civil matter. They said I should hire a lawyer. They said they could not help. She shook her head, staring into the distance. Hire a lawyer. I did not even have enough money for Lily's medicine. Where would I find money for a lawyer? I had $600 left. $600 against $50,000. I knew I had lost before the fight began. Dominic fell silent for a long time, then asked with a voice low and dangerous, Daniel Brooks. Do you know where he is? Elena shook her head. I do not know. He disappeared as if he never existed. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever real at all, or if I loved a ghost. A ghost who came to take the last thing I had left, my faith in people. Dominic nodded slowly, fixing the name Daniel Brooks in his memory. He would find that man, sooner or later. Elena paused, her shoulders beginning to tremble as she braced herself for the part of the story that hurt most, the part she had tried to bury yet could never forget, and she drew a deep breath to steady her voice before continuing. 2 weeks after the debt collectors showed up, she said, they sold my debt to someone else, and the one who bought it was Vincent Romano. Dominic straightened in his seat, his gray eyes darkening. He came at night, Elena went on. I had just gotten home from work and was feeding Lily dinner when there was a violent pounding at the door, and when I opened it, 3 men were standing there. The one in front was tall, dressed in a black suit, with a snake tattoo curled along his neck. He looked me up and down and then smiled. He said he was Vincent Romano, and that from that moment on I owed him. She swallowed, her voice drying out. He told me the $50,000 of debt had become $100,000. Interest, transfer fees, processing fees, a string of numbers I could not understand, only that it was an amount I could never repay. Never. She lifted her gaze to Dominic, her eyes full of pain. I knelt and begged him. I told him I had no money. I told him I could pay little by little from my wages. I asked him for time, and he laughed. He laughed as if I had just told the funniest joke in the world. Elena's voice began to shake violently. He said I could pay in another way. He said he owned a club on the south side of the city and needed young pretty girls like me to entertain his clients. He said if I worked for him, he would take a piece of the debt each night. He said with my looks it would take only a few years to clear it. Elena's voice broke. I refused. I told him I would rather die than do that. And that was when he ordered his men to beat me. She lowered her collar, revealing the bruises and cigarette burns Dominic had seen the night before. But now, under daylight, they looked even more horrific. They punched me in the face, kicked my stomach, pressed burning cigarettes into my shoulder. And while they beat me, Lily sat in the corner crying and calling my name. She did not understand what was happening. She only knew bad people were hurting her sister. Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks. After they were done beating me, they began taking things. Everything. The bed, the wardrobe, the tables and chairs, the television, the refrigerator. They even took my clothes and left only a few ragged pieces. And then they saw Lily's wheelchair and her medical equipment. Elena's voice shattered. I crawled to them and wrapped my arms around Vincent's legs, begging him not to take the oxygen unit. I told him my sister needs it to breathe, that her lungs are too weak to function alone. I told him I would do anything he wanted, anything at all, if he would leave the machine, and he looked down at me, smiling, before kicking me aside. He told his men to load both the wheelchair and the ventilator onto the truck. Elena cried soundlessly, her body trembling uncontrollably. Before leaving, he leaned down and whispered in my ear. He said he would return in 3 days. He said I would either agree to work for him or he would take Lily. He said there were buyers who paid high prices for girls with Down syndrome, that they liked the innocent ones, the ones who did not know how to fight back, the ones who did not understand what was happening to them. He said Lily would be taken across the border and I would never see her again. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking in waves. He said all of that while Lily was clinging to my leg, crying. She heard everything. She did not understand all of it, but she knew bad men wanted to take her away from me. That night she cried without stopping. She kept asking why people wanted to sell her. She asked what she had done wrong. She asked why God did not love her. Dominic rose so abruptly that the chair toppled behind him with a crash. Elena flinched and looked up, but he had already turned toward the door, and she heard his heavy steps down the hallway followed by a violent thud. She did not know Dominic had just driven his fist into the wall. his knuckles bleeding, though he felt no pain, for the ache in his chest was far worse, and the fury burning inside him was more consuming than any fire in the world. He stood in the hallway, staring at his bleeding hand without feeling the sting, having heard countless cruel stories in his life, and witnessed more darkness than most men could fathom. Yet nothing Elena described had ever crossed the threshold of what he could tolerate. He pulled out his phone and dialed Tony, his voice turning to ice. "I want everything on Vincent Romano. Everything he has done in the past 2 years. Every debt he has collected. Every transaction. Every person he has touched. I want a full report in 6 hours." Tony paused for a heartbeat, understanding something catastrophic had occurred. "Understood, boss. I will mobilize everyone we have." 6 hours later, Tony stood before Dominic in the study, holding a thick stack of files, his face pale as if he himself could not believe what he had uncovered. "Boss," he began heavily, "this is far worse than we imagined. For 2 years, Vincent Romano has been operating independently in the South Side, completely outside the organization's control." Dominic nodded for him to continue. "He has extorted 12 families with fabricated debts," Tony said, flipping through the pages. "The total amount he stole exceeds $2 million. All of it followed the same pattern. He targeted the vulnerable, the ones who could not fight back, and created false debts to squeeze them." Dominic stared at the list of victims. A 58-year-old widowed Asian woman whose laundromat had been robbed, a 31-year-old single mother threatened with losing her daughter, a 72-year-old veteran forced from his home, a disabled woman whose wheelchair had been taken, an 80-year-old grandmother robbed of her retirement money. 12 families, 12 ruined lives, 12 stories soaked in grief. They all had something in common, Tony said. They were people with no protection. Widows, single mothers, the elderly alone, the disabled. People too afraid to go to the police, too poor to hire lawyers, too isolated to ask for help. Vincent chose his victims carefully. He knew exactly who could be bullied without consequences. "And he used my name," Dominic said, his voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "Yes, boss," Tony answered. "He told every victim he worked for Salvatore. He told them that anyone who resisted him was resisting you. He told them the Mafia would burn their houses and kill their families if they dared to speak. They were so terrified they barely dared to breathe. They believed they were facing your entire empire when in reality they were being preyed upon by a sewer rat." Dominic gripped the arm of his chair so hard the wood creaked beneath his hand. "Anything else?" Tony hesitated, then turned to the last page, his face ashen. "Yes, boss. And this is the worst part. Vincent runs a trafficking ring. He sold 3 young girls across the Mexican border this past year." Dominic lifted his head, his gray eyes now black as a storm. 3 girls, Tony continued, his voice trembling. They were between 16 and 20, all daughters or granddaughters of victims who could not pay. He told their families that if they had no money he would take their daughters instead, and he kept his word. The girls were moved across the border and sold into prostitution networks in Mexico. We do not know if they are alive. Silence descended like a shroud. Dominic stared at the files, at the innocent faces in the photographs, girls who should have been in school, laughing with friends, living ordinary lives, not dragged into hell by a monster wearing a human face and hiding behind his name. He closed the file and set it down, and when he spoke his voice was so cold the air in the room seemed to freeze. "Vincent Romano will wish he had never been born." That night, after Tony left, Dominic did not return to his bedroom but sat alone in the dark of his study. The only light, the thin wash of moon filtering through the window and striking a face carved in stone. And although the files of the 12 victimized families lay on the desk before him, he did not look at them, for his gaze drifted backward into the shadows of memory, to the time when he too had been a frightened child like Lily, when he too had possessed only one person in the world and had watched that person taken by cruelty. His mother, Isabella, had been the most beautiful and gentle woman he had ever known, her long black hair falling like a river down her back, her warm brown eyes soft as honey, her smile bright enough to dispel every darkness in her son's heart. His father had died when he was too young to remember, and Isabella had raised Dominic alone in a cramped Chicago tenement, working 2 jobs, sewing in a factory by day and cleaning offices by night. Yet no matter how exhausted she was, she always found time to tell him stories before bed and promised that someday life would be kinder, that God always had a plan for those who waited with patience. Then Carlo appeared, a man she met at church, polite and charming, offering promises of a better life for both mother and child, and she remarried when Dominic was 8. And for a few brief weeks, everything felt perfect. As they moved to a larger apartment, Dominic had his own room, and Carlo bought him toys and took him to baseball games. but the mask cracked quickly. By the second month, Carlo drank heavily, and by the third he began to hit. First only a slap when dinner displeased him, then a punch when Isabella came home late, then terrible beatings when he was drunk, or when he gambled away money, or when the world angered him in some nameless way. Dominic lay awake those nights listening to his mother cry, listening to her beg, listening to objects break, and he remembered how powerless he felt, a thin 8-year-old boy who could not save her no matter how desperately he wanted to, though he tried once, running out to push Carlo away only to be struck down himself, and Isabella had held him afterward, weeping, begging him never to intervene again, assuring him she would be fine, insisting that Carlo was only under stress, insisting that things would get better. But nothing ever did. The night that changed everything came when Dominic was 12, a winter night frozen to the bone, when Carlo stumbled home drunk and furious after losing every dollar at a casino, and he beat Isabella like an animal, not stopping when she fell, not stopping when she stopped moving, not stopping until something in him finally registered what he had done, and he fled the apartment in panic. Dominic crawled to his mother, cradling her still body, his shirt soaked in her blood, and Isabella opened her eyes one last time and whispered with a dying breath, "Live well, become the man I am proud of, and one day an angel will come for you." And then she closed her eyes in her 12-year-old son's arms. Dominic held her until morning when the police arrived. Carlo was arrested, but his lawyer claimed manslaughter, and he served only 8 years. 8 years for the kindest woman in the world. Dominic entered an orphanage, growing up with hatred and resolve, building his empire from nothing, climbing the underworld through ruthlessness and intelligence, yet clinging to one sacred rule: never harm innocent women and children, never become Carlo. And Vincent Romano had broken that rule under Dominic's own name. Dominic opened his eyes, staring into the darkness, and his whisper drifted through the silent night, cold and unwavering. "Mother, I will keep my promise." The next morning, Dominic decided to take Elena to meet the other victims of Vincent, for he needed her to see the full picture, to understand she was not the only life ruined by that monster, and he also needed to witness firsthand what had been done in his name, to ensure his fury would not cool until justice was fulfilled. Their first stop was a small laundromat on the corner of Ashland and South Side. Yet instead of entering, Dominic led Elena to a decrepit room a few blocks away, where the wooden stairs groaned, and the air reeked of damp and peeling paint curled like fish scales, for this was where a 58-year-old widow lived after losing everything. The woman who opened the door was small and Asian, her silver hair tied back, her face carved with lines of a lifetime's hardship, and when she saw Dominic she recoiled in fear, whispering that she had nothing left, that she had given them everything, begging him to spare her. But Dominic lifted his hand gently and said he had not come to take anything, only to hear her story and to mend what had been broken. Patricia Chen studied him warily, then looked at Elena, whose bruised face held a pain too familiar, and at last she opened the door wider. The room was barely 10 square meters, with an old single bed, a tiny table, a small gas stove, no refrigerator, no television, nothing but emptiness and poverty. She sat at the edge of the bed, her thin hands folded in her lap, and told them her husband had died of lung cancer 2 years earlier, leaving her the laundromat he had built over 40 years, small but enough for her to survive. Until 6 months ago, when Vincent arrived claiming her husband owed him $20,000, showing her a forged signature she recognized as false, but he did not care, and threatened to burn the shop if she did not pay, insisting he worked for Salvatore and no one dared defy him, and because she had no money, he forced her to sell the laundromat to his men for $5,000, though it was worth at least $80,000. And now she labored in the very shop her husband left her, washing clothes for strangers in the place she had once owned, seeing her husband's photo on the wall each day and wanting to die. Elena sat beside her, holding her worn hands, whispering that she understood, that she too had been broken by him. And the two women looked at one another and needed no more words as pain knitted them together. Dominic stood watching, his jaw clenched tight, and he told Patricia he would take her shop back, promising it firmly, though she replied she no longer believed in people, no longer trusted anyone, and Dominic nodded and said she did not have to trust him, only to wait and see. Leaving her room, Dominic and Elena went to their second stop, a dilapidated apartment in Englewood, one of Chicago's poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods, where cracked concrete stairs, graffiti-covered walls, and the smell of trash surrounded them. And Dominic knocked on the door of Unit 7 on the 3rd floor. Children's cries echoed inside, then soft footsteps, and the door opened a crack to reveal a woman in her early 30s who looked at least a decade older. her eyes hollow with sleeplessness, her cheeks sunken, her black hair tied hastily. And when she saw Dominic, she tried to close the door, but he stopped it, and she whispered that her daughter was gone, that she had sent her away and he could not take her. But Dominic told her he had not come to take her child, only to hear her story and to bring the girl home. Rosa Gonzalez stared at him with fear and suspicion, then saw Elena behind him, bruised, wounded, and something in her softened. She let them in. The apartment was tiny. 2 bedrooms where Rosa lived with her 3 children. 2 little ones playing with battered toys and watching the newcomers with wary eyes. And Rosa began to speak in a hoarse voice, explaining that her ex-husband had abandoned her 3 years earlier, leaving her penniless with 3 kids. And she worked 2 jobs to keep them alive until Vincent arrived, claiming her ex-husband owed him $30,000 and that the debt now belonged to her. And when she insisted she had never signed anything, he laughed and said it did not matter, that she would pay him or he would take something else. And then he looked at Isabella, her 14-year-old daughter, saying the girl was beautiful and would fetch a high price across the border, saying that if she had no money, he would take the child and sell her, saying she would never see her daughter again. Rosa broke down, trembling as she explained she had no money, no family to help, too terrified of the police because Vincent claimed to work for Salvatore and threatened to kill her whole family if she spoke. And in the end, she had sent Isabella into hiding with an old friend 3 states away, not seeing her daughter for 4 months, telling her younger children their sister was away at school, crying every night because she was a mother who could not protect her child, a mother forced to send her daughter away so she would not be sold like property. Elena knelt beside Rosa and wrapped her arms around her, whispering that she understood, that her own sister had nearly been sold, and that she knew that fear, that helplessness, and the 2 women clung to each other, united by grief and the instinct to protect those they loved. Dominic watched, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched, and he pulled out his phone and called Tony, his voice cold as forged steel, telling him to find Isabella Gonzalez somewhere 3 states west of Chicago and bring her home safely and immediately. Rosa looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, asking if he meant it, and Dominic met her gaze, his gray eyes icy but his voice unwavering as he said, "Your daughter will come home, I promise." On the drive back to the estate, Dominic's phone vibrated and Tony's urgent voice came through, strained and breathless as he said they had found something, a secret warehouse Vincent had been using in the abandoned industrial district on the south side, and that Dominic needed to come immediately. And Dominic glanced at Elena sitting beside him, her eyes swollen and red from everything she had witnessed in Rosa's home, before ordering the driver to change course. And 20 minutes later, the convoy stopped, before a rusted metal warehouse, standing alone in the desolate sprawl of concrete and weeds, its windows boarded over, its silence heavy as a tomb. But when Dominic stepped inside, what he saw made the fury inside him erupt like a volcanic flame. 5 iron cages stood in a row along the wall, and inside each cage was a young girl, curled against the freezing concrete floor, wrists chained to metal bars, clothes torn, hair matted, faces hollowed by hunger and terror. Girls who appeared to be between 16 and 22, girls who should have been in school or laughing with friends or living ordinary lives, instead of being imprisoned like livestock awaiting transport across a border as merchandise. Elena came in behind Dominic, and when she saw the cages, she covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks, for she had nearly become one of them, and Lily had nearly been locked inside one of those cages. One of the girls recognized Dominic and crawled to the bars, clutching them with trembling hands, her eyes wide with terror and hopelessness, as she pleaded for him not to sell them, promising they would do anything, telling him the truck was coming the next night to take them to Mexico, begging him not to let them be taken. Dominic knelt before her, his voice losing its familiar coldness and softening into something almost gentle, as he told her no one was selling them, that he had come to take them home, and then he turned to Tony and ordered him to break every lock immediately. The warehouse filled with the shriek of metal as the saws cut through the chains. Locks fell, cage doors swung open, and the girls staggered out, shaking, unable to believe what was happening, some crying, some collapsing, some clinging to one another as if afraid the rescue itself might vanish. And Elena moved from girl to girl, holding them, whispering that they were safe now, for she understood their fear and the sensation of standing on the edge of a hell you could not escape. Tony came to Dominic then, his voice low as he said there was something Dominic needed to know, that one of these girls was the daughter of a man named James Wilson, and Dominic followed his gaze to a girl of 18 sitting alone in a corner, not crying, not speaking, staring into nothing with empty, hollow eyes. When Dominic asked who James Wilson was, Tony explained he had been a 72-year-old veteran, also victimized by Vincent, unable to repay a fabricated debt, and Vincent had taken his daughter, and the old man had believed she had been sold across the border, had lost hope of ever finding her, and 2 weeks earlier he had taken his own life. Dominic froze, and Tony added that the girl did not know, that she had been locked in the warehouse for a month with no news from the outside and was unaware her father was dead. Dominic approached her and knelt, and she lifted her gaze, a faint glimmer of light returning to her empty eyes as she asked in a hoarse whisper whether he knew her father, whether he knew James Wilson, the veteran who had promised to find her. Dominic had no words, for he saw the hope in her eyes and knew he owed her the truth. But before he could speak, she read the answer in his expression, whispered no, shook her head, asked again where her father was, and then comprehension shattered her, and she screamed, the sound echoing through the warehouse as she pounded her hands against the floor and cried out for the man who would never come, her sobs tearing through the air like something alive. Dominic stood unmoving, his fists clenched so tightly his nails cut into his skin. For Vincent Romano had not only stolen money and trafficked human beings, he had killed, and he would pay. The convoy returned to the estate in heavy silence, and the 5 rescued girls were taken to the medical wing for examinations and care. But Elena could not silence the echo of the Wilson girls' screams, the sound of a child calling for a father she had already lost, nor could she erase the images of cages, of desperate eyes, of thin hands gripping metal bars in terror. She entered her room, closed the door, and everything she had held inside all day broke free, sending her rushing to the bathroom where she collapsed before the toilet, retching until her empty stomach could produce nothing more, and then she slid down onto the cold tile floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and began to sob, not the quiet, restrained weeping of the previous days, but loud, jagged wails torn from a soul that had stared into the abyss and realized how close she had come to falling in. Images flooded her mind like a storm. The iron cages, the 16-year-old girl curled in a corner, the 20-year-old chained to metal bars, the 18-year-old screaming for a dead father, and Lily, innocent, bright-eyed Lily, who did not understand why the world had been so cruel to her. Lily, who had been moments from being locked in those cages, from being taken across a border, from disappearing forever. Elena hit the wall, the physical pain meaningless beside the agony in her heart, and she thought of 3 days earlier when Vincent Romano had stood in her apartment laughing as he spoke of selling Lily as though she were an object, saying they liked the innocent ones, the ones who did not know how to fight back. And she thought of Lily's clear eyes hearing those words, eyes that could not understand why someone wanted to take her away. She imagined Lily trapped in a cage, starving, chained, waiting to be sold like an animal. And her scream tore out of her, wordless and raw, carrying the pure terror and rage that had lived inside her for too long. And she struck her head against the wall, struck her fists against the floor, scratched at the tile until her fingertips bled, not feeling the pain, only wanting to drown out the horror consuming her. A soft knock sounded, but Elena did not hear, lost in her storm, until the door opened, and a small figure appeared. Lily standing in the doorway with wide eyes watching her sister crumble. The girl said nothing, only walked to her, sat beside her on the cold floor, and wrapped her arms around her, the same small arms that had clung to Elena for 18 years. "Lena," Lily whispered, her voice gentle as spring air, "do not cry. I am here. I am not going anywhere." Elena clutched her sister and wept into her shoulder, her body shaking uncontrollably. "I am safe," Lily murmured, stroking her sister's hair with her tiny hand. "You saved me. You always save me. You are the strongest person I know. You protected me for 8 years. You gave up everything for me. You are my angel, Lena." Elena sobbed harder, holding the girl as though afraid she might disappear. She had been strong for 8 long years, carrying everything alone, never collapsing, never allowing herself to break. But now, in the arms of the younger sister she had spent her life protecting, she allowed herself to be weak. Lily held her without speaking further, steady as a small stone in a storm, and after a long moment she whispered that now the angel would save her sister too, that Mr. Dom would protect them, that she believed in him. The 2 sisters sat there on the cold bathroom floor, holding each other in silence as the evening light faded outside the window and darkness filled the room. But in that darkness they still had each other, and sometimes that was all a person needed to survive. That midnight the estate lay under a blanket of silence, and Dominic could not sleep, lying on his bed staring at the ceiling while his mind spun with the images from the warehouse, with the screams of the Wilson girl, with the hollow eyes of the young women curled in iron cages, and at last he rose, pulled on a robe, and stepped out onto the third-floor balcony to breathe the cold night air. And that was when he saw her, Elena, standing on her own balcony only a few yards away, wearing the white sleepwear Maria had prepared, her brown hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her gaze turned toward the darkened city. And even from the distance Dominic knew she was crying, for he could see her shoulders tremble and hear faint, broken sobs carried by the night wind. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should approach, but his feet moved on their own, carrying him through the hallway to her balcony, and when Elena heard footsteps she turned, quickly wiping her tears, trying to steady herself as she apologized in a hoarse whisper and said she could not sleep, and Dominic replied that neither could he. He stood beside her, leaning against the railing and looking out at the city, and for a long while they remained silent, two lonely silhouettes beneath the autumn sky, each lost in their own thoughts until Elena spoke, her voice barely more than a breath, as she asked why he was helping them. And Dominic did not answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the distant skyline, prompting Elena to continue as she reminded him that he was Mafia, the head of the underworld, a man who could do anything without caring for anyone. And she asked again why he cared about a girl like her, why he saved people who had no value to him. Silence lingered, the cold night wind sweeping past them, and then Dominic began to speak, his voice low and distant, as if he were speaking more to memory than to her, telling her his mother's name was Isabella, the most beautiful and gentle woman he had ever known, with long black hair and warm brown eyes, and a smile that could make anything feel better, and how she had raised him alone in a Chicago slum while working 2 jobs but had never complained. And Elena turned to look at him, startled, for this was the first time he had revealed anything about himself. He told her his mother remarried when he was 8, to a man named Carlo, who at first seemed kind before he began to beat her. And Dominic paused, gripping the railing, saying he had been too young to protect her and could only lie in his room listening to her cry and beg while blows fell, and how once he had rushed out to stop Carlo only to be knocked aside, and how his mother had begged him never to intervene, promising she would be fine, promising things would get better, promises that proved false. Dominic's voice trembled slightly, something Elena never imagined she would witness in a man like him, as he said that one night when he was 12, Carlo came home drunk and beat his mother until she no longer moved, and Dominic held her body all through the night until the police came in the morning. Elena covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face, unable to imagine such a wound inside the man the city feared most. Dominic continued, saying Carlo had been arrested but his lawyer called it manslaughter, and the man served only 8 years. 8 years for the life of his mother, 8 years for the gentlest woman in the world. And he turned toward Elena, his gray eyes revealing the pain he had buried for 25 years, as he told her that before she died, his mother whispered to him to live well, to become a man she could be proud of, and that one day an angel would come for him, and he had never believed it. Thinking angels did not exist, building his empire through violence and fear, yet clinging to a single rule: never harm innocent women and children, never become Carlo. Elena looked at him with tears streaming freely, finally understanding why he had helped her, why he had exploded with rage at what Vincent had done, and she whispered that he was not a monster, that he was someone who had been hurt, just like them. Dominic looked at her, and in that moment the walls he had built around his heart for 25 years began to crack, and he told her he had done terrible things and was not a good man, yet there were lines he would never cross, and Vincent had crossed them under his name. Elena placed her hand gently on his arm, a gesture of trust she never thought she would offer again, and thanked him for saving Lily, for saving her, for giving them hope. They stood together in silence, 2 wounded hearts finding each other in the stillness of night, and for the first time both felt a little less alone. 3 days after that night on the balcony, Dominic summoned the entire organization for what would not be a normal meeting but a day of judgment, and in the largest warehouse of the Salvatore organization on the eastern industrial side of Chicago, a massive steel and concrete building where the most consequential decisions of the underworld were made, more than 50 men gathered in rigid rows, tense and silent, the most loyal of Dominic's ranks, uncertain why they had been called but aware that when the boss ordered a full assembly the matter was grave. Vincent Romano entered the warehouse with the confidence of a man who had no idea he was about to die, dressed in a black suit, his hair slicked back, the snake tattoo on his neck visible as he smirked at his associates and took a seat in the front row, crossing his legs as if this were a routine briefing, unaware that the cages had been found, unaware that the girls had been freed, unaware that Dominic had met Elena and seen the bruises and burns on her body, still believing he was safe beneath the shadow of the Salvatore empire. He whispered to the man beside him, asking what was going on, joking that the boss must have a major deal to announce, but the man did not answer and looked away with a strange expression. Vincent shrugged and checked his phone, oblivious to the approaching end of the life he knew. Then the doors behind the stage opened, and Dominic walked in wearing a black suit, his hair slicked back, his gray eyes cold as steel. With Tony behind him, his loyal lieutenant's jaw clenched so hard the muscles stood out. The room fell silent, 50 men standing like a single wall as they turned to face their boss, the air so heavy it could have been carved with a knife. Dominic scanned the room, his gaze pausing on Vincent for a mere heartbeat before moving on, and then he spoke in a voice low and frigid, saying he had summoned them to witness what happened to those who betrayed the organization. A murmur swept the room, anxiety stirring, and Vincent sat up straighter, the smile fading from his face as Dominic continued, saying that for the past 2 years someone among them had used his name to commit crimes, fabricating debts for 12 innocent families in the South Side, extorting more than $2 million from widows, single mothers, the elderly, and the disabled, preying on people who had no protection, who were too frightened to go to the police, too powerless to resist. Vincent's eyes darted around as he sensed danger, but Dominic went on, his voice growing colder as he declared that this man had also run a trafficking ring, had sold 3 young women across the Mexican border, had held 5 others captive in a secret warehouse awaiting transport, girls between 16 and 22, daughters and granddaughters of the victims he had extorted. The room froze, 50 pairs of eyes turning toward Vincent with horror and disgust. Vincent stood, his face drained of color, yet he tried to appear composed as he insisted he had done none of it, that he had been loyal, that he had merely collected debts according to the rules, but Dominic cut him off with a thunderous command, telling him to be silent and that he would speak only when given permission, and now he was allowed only to listen. Vincent faltered, staring around the room for support, but every man turned away, leaving him stranded and exposed like an animal cornered against a wall. Dominic signaled to Tony, and the side door of the warehouse opened as one figure after another stepped inside, faces Vincent recognized instantly, beginning with Patricia Chen, the 58-year-old widow whose laundromat he had stolen, her steps slow but unwavering, her eyes fixed on him with a quiet, burning hatred, followed by Rosa Gonzalez, the single mother he had threatened to sell a daughter from. Her hand clasped tightly around Isabella's, the 14-year-old girl who had just been brought home from her hiding place 3 states away, and then the 5 young women rescued from the warehouse, the same girls he had intended to sell across the border that very night, walking shoulder to shoulder, eyes still swollen but chins lifted high, and finally the daughter of Mr. Wilson, the 18-year-old who had just lost her father, her face numb as stone, yet her eyes blazing with grief and fury, and now all 12 families stood there, forming a half-circle facing Vincent, living proof of everything he had done. Vincent stepped back, his face turning white as paper, while Dominic announced that each of them would tell the room what Vincent Romano had done to them, and Patricia Chen stepped forward first, her thin hands trembling but her voice steady, as she recounted how he claimed her husband owed him $20,000, how he forced her to sell an $80,000 shop for $5,000, the only legacy her late husband had left after 40 years of work, and Rosa followed, tears streaming as she described how he had threatened to take her 14-year-old daughter and sell her across the border, forcing her to hide the girl for 4 long months without knowing if she was safe or alive, and one survivor after another stepped forward to speak, including the young woman who had been caged and starved, shackled like an animal awaiting sale, until at last the Wilson girl stepped out, her voice icy yet breaking with anguish as she told them her father, a 72-year-old veteran who had fought for his country, had been robbed, terrorized, and stripped of hope until he believed his daughter lost forever, and she cried out that he had taken her father's will to live, shouting that he had killed him. Vincent backed into the wall, stammering denials, insisting they lied, insisting he had merely collected debts, until Elena stepped forward, the fading bruises still visible on her face, and told him he had beaten her, taken her sister's wheelchair and ventilator, threatened to sell her 18-year-old sister with Down syndrome across the border while the girl stood there terrified and confused. Vincent's mouth hung open without sound, and then a small figure emerged behind Elena. Lily walked slowly toward him, her steps unsteady after days without a wheelchair, and she stopped before him, lifting her round, earnest eyes to the man who had nearly destroyed her life. 50 hardened men of the Chicago underworld fell utterly silent as she spoke in a voice so innocent it shattered the room, asking why he wanted to sell her, what she had done wrong, saying she only wanted to stay with her sister Lena, the only person she had in the world, asking why he wanted to take her away, why he took her wheelchair when all she wanted was to move like everyone else, why he tried to hurt her and her sister when they had done nothing to him, tears sliding down her cheeks as she asked questions that had no answer. No one in the room could meet her eyes. Some turned away, some wiped their faces, some clenched their fists. Vincent fell to his knees, speechless, the monster finally seeing himself through the eyes of an angel. Dominic watched from the stage, then declared the sentence before the entire organization, stepping down to face his former lieutenant as he stripped him of everything, saying every possession he owned would be confiscated, every house, every car, every bank account emptied to compensate the 12 families he had destroyed. And when Vincent pleaded for mercy, Dominic spoke over him, saying he was stripped of rank and protection, that from this moment his name meant nothing, that he would be exiled to a city 3,000 miles away, and spend the rest of his life working in shelters and refugee centers, serving the homeless and the forgotten without pay, without power, without recognition, until the day he died. Vincent shook his head wildly, begging for death instead, saying he would rather die than live that life. And Dominic looked down at him with eyes cold as winter stone and said death would be too easy, that he would live and remember every day what he had done. And if he ever harmed another innocent soul, Dominic himself would find him and his death would not be quick. Vincent broke down, sobbing into the floor, stripped of wealth, power, pride, and future, when Lily stepped forward again, stopping in front of the man on his knees, while Elena tried to pull her back, and the girl shook her head and asked in her gentle voice whether he would promise not to hurt anyone again. Vincent lifted his red-rimmed eyes to her and saw no hatred there, only a forgiveness he did not deserve, and he whispered that he promised, that he was sorry for everything. Lily studied him and then nodded, telling him to go become a good person, that her mother once said anyone could choose to be good, and that she believed he could too. She took Elena's hand and walked away as Vincent watched her, understanding for the first time in his life what redemption meant, not for himself but for those he had harmed. And that same night Vincent Romano was put on a bus and driven out of Chicago forever, carrying a one-way ticket, a small sum to survive his first week, and a promise made to an 18-year-old girl with Down syndrome, a promise he intended to keep until his final breath. The next day, Dominic launched the largest restitution campaign in the history of the Salvatore organization, and every asset seized from Vincent was catalogued, sorted, and prepared to be returned to each victim's family, with trucks departing at dawn carrying not only stolen belongings but also compensation for wounds that could never truly be measured in material terms, beginning with the rundown room where Patricia Chen lived. And when she opened the door to find Dominic standing there with a stack of papers, he handed her the deed to her laundromat, restored to her name, along with compensation for the 6 months of suffering she had endured, and she stared at the documents, then at Dominic, her eyes widening before tears flooded them as she clutched the papers and broke down like a child whose hope had finally returned, even throwing her arms around Dominic, the man she had once feared, until he gently rested a hand on her back and told her she deserved to have back what was hers. The next stop was Rosa Gonzalez's apartment, where her 2 little ones hid behind her legs, but it was not the returned furniture that made her cry. It was the 14-year-old girl stepping off the truck, and Rosa ran to Isabella with a scream of relief, while the girl sobbed into her arms and the family clung together in one trembling knot of grief and joy, and Elena watched them, understanding that trembling sense of almost losing someone you love and the miracle of having them back. The convoy moved on, returning belongings to the elderly living alone, medical equipment to those with disabilities, hope to widows who had none, and delivering the 5 rescued girls either to their families or to safe places where they could begin again, while the daughter of Mr. Wilson, the girl who had lost her father, received a new apartment and a full scholarship arranged personally by Dominic, the only form of reparation he could offer for a life stolen too soon. At last the trucks returned to the Salvatore estate, where Elena and Lily waited in the yard, and when the truck door opened, Lily squealed at the sight of her wheelchair, hurrying as best she could toward it, hugging the frame as though greeting an old friend before climbing in, and spinning joyfully across the driveway, like a child receiving a Christmas gift, telling Lena she would learn to walk again, that the doctor said she could do it if she practiced, and Elena cried with a joy she had thought her body had forgotten how to feel, holding her sister in her arms as they laughed and wept together. Dominic watched from a distance, seeing 2 sisters embrace, seeing families stitched back together, seeing grief soften under the return of what had been taken, and for the first time in many years he felt the weight in his chest loosen as though he had done something that mattered. 3 months passed like a gentle dream as Elena and Lily settled into their new apartment in Lincoln Park, small but warm, with a bedroom for Lily and windows opening toward green parks and morning light. While Elena began working for the Lily Foundation, the charity Dominic founded for exploited women and children, where she handled cases and guided families toward safety, finally feeling her life meant something again. And Lily grew stronger with proper medical care, managing 20 steps with a walker, the doctor saying she might walk nearly normally within a year, and each evening the sisters sat on their balcony watching the city lights flicker, believing the nightmare had ended, but they were wrong. That night, at 2 a.m, Elena woke to the smell of smoke, her throat raw, her eyes stinging, and when she ran into the living room, she saw flames licking the window, devouring the curtains, racing up the walls as glass shattered and panicked screams echoed through the building, and she screamed for Lily, bursting into the girls' room where Lily sat frozen in fear as smoke poured in, coughing and clutching her chest, crying that she was scared, and Elena swept her into her arms, shielding her from the heat as they fled toward the door, only to find the hallway choked with black smoke, forcing Elena to turn back toward the balcony, as fire roared behind them, searing her skin through her thin pajamas, yet she kept moving because Lily was all she had, kicking open the balcony door and stumbling down the fire escape, coughing, shaking, the world tilting around her as sirens wailed in the distance and voices screamed from other apartments, and she clung to Lily, step after agonizing step, until her feet touched the ground, bright streetlights cutting through the smoke as her strength gave out, and she collapsed, Lily slipping from her arms as darkness swallowed her. When Elena awoke in the hospital, white lights burning above her and antiseptic stinging her nose, she tried to sit up, pain ripping through her back and arms until a familiar voice told her not to move, and she turned to see Dominic in the chair beside her bed, face taut, eyes carved with worry, and the first words out of her mouth were to ask where Lily was, her voice rough with fear, and Dominic took her hand, saying Lily was safe, that she had inhaled smoke but would recover, that she was sleeping in the next room, and Elena let out a shaking sob of relief, but the look on Dominic's face told her something was wrong, and when she asked why the apartment burned, he clenched his jaw before saying it had not been an accident, that an accelerant had been found, that a message had been spray-painted on the building, and when Elena asked what it said, he answered that it read "Betrayal must die." Then a small voice came from the doorway, calling Mr. Dom, and they turned to see Lily standing there, holding the doorframe with trembling hands, her eyes red and frightened as she asked if the bad people had come back, saying she thought they were gone, saying she thought they were safe, asking why anyone still wanted to hurt her and her sister, and Dominic rose to kneel before her, taking her small hands in his voice steady as steel as he told her no one would ever touch her again, that he would find whoever had done this, and that he would protect her and her sister at any cost. Dominic did not sleep for 3 days, spending every waking moment investigating the fire, mobilizing every resource in the organization to uncover the hand behind it, while Tony led the investigation team, gathering scraps of evidence from the scene, interviewing shaken witnesses, and combing through security cameras in the area. And what they uncovered told Dominic this was no ordinary act of revenge, because the accelerant used was a rare, high-grade chemical known only to specialists, the burn pattern impossibly clean, with no fingerprints, no witnesses, no trace of the person who set it, the work of a professional, of someone paid well to kill without leaving a shadow behind. It was not Vincent's men, not the exiled lieutenant who lacked the means to orchestrate something of this scale, leaving only one question: who? Tony brought the answer on the 3rd day, stepping into Dominic's office pale and shaken, holding a thick file as he explained that the accelerant had been traced to an underground supplier connected to Marco De Luca, a name Dominic had not heard in years, a longtime rival, the brutal West Side boss who had always wanted to expand his territory at any cost, a man Dominic believed he had reached an unspoken truce with. When Dominic asked what else they had found, Tony revealed something darker, that Marco had been quietly funding Vincent's entire operation from the beginning, every false debt, every trafficking route, every atrocity, with the intention of destroying Dominic's reputation from within, poisoning the community against the Salvatore name, making people like Elena believe the organization preyed on the weak, and when Vincent was exposed and removed, Marco's plan collapsed, sending him into a rage that led him to burn Elena's apartment as a warning to anyone who dared align themselves with Dominic. The file snapped shut in Dominic's hands, his eyes darkening to a storm as he demanded to know where Marco was. And Tony answered that he kept a heavily guarded villa in the western suburbs, but that they had found a breach in the security grid. That night, Dominic led his most elite strike team, slipping into the compound like shadows, neutralizing guards without a sound, dismantling the security system as if peeling away paper, and when they kicked open Marco's bedroom door, the West Side Kingpin sat up in bed with terror widening his eyes before he tried to mask it with bluster, accusing Dominic of trespassing on his territory. Dominic stepped forward, telling him he had set fire to the home of an innocent girl and nearly killed 2 sisters, asking if Marco truly believed there would be no consequences, and Marco laughed, a brittle, arrogant laugh, insisting Dominic was no better, that he too had blood on his hands, that he had ruined lives and therefore had no right to claim any moral ground. Dominic met his gaze with eyes cold as forged steel, and told him he knew the boundary while Marco did not, that he had never touched innocent women or children, never used vulnerable people as pawns, never forgiven anyone who crossed that line. Marco tried to fight as 2 men pinned him, screaming that Dominic could not kill him because he had police allies and political favors and that harming him would bring chaos down upon Dominic's head. But Dominic turned away and said he would not kill him, he would simply make him disappear. And that night, Marco DeLuca vanished from Chicago without a trace. No body, no evidence, no rumor strong enough to grip. His empire erased in a single night as lesser factions divided his territory, men who understood and feared the boundaries set by Dominic Salvatore, and the message that spread through the underworld was clear and cold as winter stone. Anyone who dared touch those under Dominic's protection would themselves be erased. 6 months after the fire, Elena and Lily's lives had changed completely as they moved into a new apartment in a heavily protected district, where no one could approach them without passing through layers of Salvatore security, and Elena, fully healed from her burns, except for a few pale scars that lingered like quiet reminders of that terrifying night, continued to run the Lily Foundation, which, under her guidance, had helped more than 50 families throughout the city, finding work for widows, helping single mothers with rent and school fees, and offering free legal support to those who had been exploited. And through it all, she discovered a sense of purpose she had never known before, helping people who had once suffered as she had. Lily grew stronger than ever, attending a special school where she made new friends, returning home each day with a bright smile and stories to tell. And the most extraordinary part of all was that she had learned to walk 10 steps with a training frame, each small step a triumph, a living testament to the quiet power of hope and love. Dominic changed too, drawing new boundaries for the organization, rules no one was allowed to cross, banning debt collection from families with children under 18, forbidding threats against widows or single mothers, and declaring that no harm would ever come to anyone who could not defend themselves, promising that anyone who broke these rules would meet the same fate as Vincent Romano. One spring evening, while cherry blossoms drifted through the park below, Dominic found Elena standing on the balcony of her new apartment, and he joined her the way he had stood beside her months earlier on the balcony of his estate, both of them silent for a long moment as the city glowed beneath them, until Dominic finally spoke in a low, measured voice, saying he did not know when everything had begun. Perhaps the night he found her in the dark alley, perhaps when she told him her story, or perhaps when Lily called him an angel, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he did not want to lose her. Elena turned to him, her brown eyes layered with emotions, admitting she no longer knew how to trust, that the last man she had trusted had destroyed her life and thrown her into hell, that she was afraid of trusting again only to be shattered once more. And Dominic looked at her and said he would never ask her to trust him, that he knew words meant nothing now, but he would prove himself every day through action, not promise, and she did not need to trust him today. She only needed to give him a chance to show her who he was. She looked at him, this man who commanded the darkest corners of Chicago, standing before her with the earnest, vulnerable expression of a man in love. But before she could speak, a small voice drifted from the balcony doorway, as Lily stood there clutching a stuffed bear, her innocent eyes curious as she asked if Mr. Dom could be Lena's husband, saying Elena laughed more when he was around, saying she liked her sister's laughter, saying she had never heard it before but now she heard it every day and she thought it was because of him. Elena flushed while Dominic let out a rare laugh few had ever heard, and he knelt before Lily and asked if she truly thought he should marry her sister, and Lily nodded with the earnest conviction only she possessed, saying he was a good man, that he had saved them, that he made her sister smile, and that he kept his promises. And her mother had once said a good man was someone who kept his promises. Dominic looked at the girl, and then at Elena, And in his eyes, Elena saw something she had never seen before. Hope. 1 month later, on Elena's 25th birthday, she had a new family as Lily grew stronger, walking more steps each day, and Dominic stood beside her not as a protector but as a man who loved her with his whole heart. And Elena, the woman who once cried alone in a dark alley believing she had lost everything, now laughed in the midst of the people she loved, realizing her future was no longer something to fear, because sometimes the darkest storms lead to the brightest dawns, and sometimes it takes a king of shadows to bring a fading rose back to life. For true strength is not measured by how many people fear you, but by how many broken hearts you have the courage to heal. This story offers us precious lessons about life, reminding us that no matter how dark your situation may be, there is always light at the end of the tunnel, that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places, that family is not only the people who share your blood but also those who are willing to sacrifice for you, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. How did this story make you feel? And did it remind you of someone in your own life? Perhaps someone who helped you when you felt hopeless, or someone you once helped through their darkest hour? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because we would love to hear the stories carried in your hearts. And if you enjoyed this story, please remember to like the video and share it with those you care about, and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another moving story. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue creating meaningful content. We wish all of you watching this video good health, joy, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for being with us, and goodbye until the next video.